There were, Marigold Thorne had learned over the course of her 22 years, 3 categories of bad days. There were ordinary bad days, the kind where you burned your porridge, stubbed the same toe twice, and a crow stole your best hair ribbon. Annoying, but survivable. There were genuinely terrible days, the kind involving illness or loss, or the specific bone-deep exhaustion that came from being the only person in a village who could hear what the animals were saying, and being absolutely unable to explain to anyone why that meant she was late to everything. And then, above those 2, sitting alone at the very top of a mountain of misery with a little flag planted in it, there was today. Today was a Category 3. It had started the moment she'd been pulled out of bed before dawn by her Aunt Sechi, who had shoved the old green dress into her arms and declared that Marigold would attend the tribute presentation at Ashvale Castle. She would look presentable, and she would not, under any circumstances, speak to any animals while she was there. "The dress doesn't fit," Marigold had said. "It fits enough," Aunt Sechi had replied, which was technically true if you defined enough as it covers the majority of you and has not yet split. A definition that Pudding, sitting on the end of the bed and watching the whole affair with the magnificent indifference that only a very fat orange cat could achieve, had greeted with a slow, deliberate blink. "You look like a sausage that's been told it's a duchess," Pudding had said. "Thank you," Marigold had said. "You are not helping." "I'm not trying to help. I'm observing." Another blink. "I'm coming with you." "You are absolutely not coming with me." Pudding had climbed, with great ceremony and no particular haste, into Marigold's canvas market basket and arranged himself among the spare cloth and dried herbs with the air of someone who had already made a decision and considered the matter closed. She had tried to remove him twice. He had simply become heavier. It was a talent he had. He was still in the basket when she climbed into the cart. The other women from Thornwall had spent that journey doing what they always did, talking about the king. Not warmly. "Dryston Ashvale doesn't take a Luna from presentations," Lena Fairgate had announced to no one and everyone, smoothing her frost-pale gown with the satisfaction of someone who had already rehearsed this speech. "He barely looks at them. They say his eyes go straight past anyone who isn't worth his time, and he decides in 3 seconds. She let the pause sit there, fat and deliberate. 3 seconds. That's all you get. "He's chosen his betrothed already anyway," said another woman, Petra, the blacksmith's daughter, who had the particular gift of stating things as facts that were actually rumors dressed up in very confident clothing. "Lady Callista Drath. She's been groomed for this since she was 12. Perfect bloodline, perfect face, trained in court protocol and alpha law, and probably how to fold a napkin into a swan." Petra glanced at Marigold, glanced at the dress, looked away with the diplomacy of someone who had decided that silence was kinder than anything she could actually say. Marigold had stared out at the road and said nothing. She had been telling herself for years that other people's opinions of her were their problem and not hers. She believed this. She did. It was just that sometimes, on certain mornings, in certain too small dresses, on the way to a castle full of people who were going to look at her the way Petra had just looked at her, the belief sat a little less comfortably in her chest than usual. From inside the basket, Pudding pressed his warm, heavy head against her knee. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. It was the most articulate thing he'd done all morning. "You smell sad?" said the old pigeon perched on the cart's rear board. "Thank you, Gerald," Marigold said quietly, so no one else would hear. "Very helpful." "I'm not Gerald. Gerald is the badger. You all look the same to me in the dark." The pigeon ruffled, deeply offended, and flew away. Pudding watched it go with the professional interest of someone mentally filing it away for later. Ashvale Castle was, Marigold had to admit, extraordinarily beautiful and deeply terrifying in equal measure, which she supposed was the point. It rose out of the northern hills like something the earth had grown on purpose. Dark stone walls bleeding into dark forest, towers so tall they disappeared into the morning cloud, and at the main gate, 2 wolves the size of small horses who watched the arriving carts with the alert, assessing patience of creatures who had never once in their lives been told they were anything less than magnificent. Marigold felt them notice her before she saw them look. It was always like that. Animals didn't see her the way people did. They didn't see the dress or the red hair that refused to stay where she put it, or the extra softness of her arms and her waist, and all the other parts of her that people thought they were being subtle about noticing. Animals just saw whatever it was that she carried in the space behind her sternum, the thing she had no name for, the thing that made creatures trust her. The closer wolf turned its massive silver head directly toward her. "Whisper," it said. Not her name, but the word itself. The old word, the one the wolves used for people like her. It was not quite a greeting. It was more like recognition. Marigold's heart did something complicated. She didn't have time to think about it, because the cart stopped, and Lena was already descending with the practiced grace of someone who had rehearsed even that, and Aunt Cheche was hissing at Marigold to hurry up and, for the love of everything, stop looking at the wolves. Marigold stepped down, basket under her arm. Pudding's orange head appeared briefly above the rim, surveyed the castle with slow, judgmental eyes, and retreated back inside. "Big," he said simply. "Yes," she whispered. "Smells like old power and someone who doesn't laugh enough." She had no answer for that one. The presentation hall was everything Marigold had imagined, and worse. 200 women from a dozen villages, all assembled along the hall's marble length in their finest clothes, waiting to be looked at and logged and ultimately overlooked by a council of assessors who had the energy of people who had been doing this since before enthusiasm was invented. Candles burned in iron chandeliers overhead. The smell of beeswax and something floral and expensive made Marigold's nose itch. Every surface in the room seemed specifically designed to reflect back everything you'd rather not see about yourself. The high mirrors, the polished floor, the way the other women's dresses caught the light in ways that hers categorically did not. She found her place in line. She stood very still. She breathed carefully. She set the basket down against the wall behind her, out of sight, and told Pudding with her eyes to stay and be silent, and please, for once in his life, simply exist quietly. Pudding looked at her, closed his eyes. She made it almost 4 entire minutes before everything went wrong. The chain of events, she would later explain to the pigeon, who was, as it turned out, named Cornelius, and was very invested in the story, was as follows. A small gray mouse ran across the hall floor. An entirely reasonable thing for a mouse to do in a large old building. The mouse, however, ran directly across the foot of Lord Assessor Hadwin, a man of advanced years and very limited tolerance for surprises, who reacted by lurching sideways with a sound that was technically a word but functionally a shriek. His elbow caught the tall ceremonial candlestand to his left. The candlestand caught Lena Fairgate on her backward step. Lena, stumbling, grabbed the nearest available thing for balance, which was Marigold's dress, specifically the twine. The twine did not hold. The sound the back seam made when it went was, objectively, impressive. Like a small flag snapping in a strong wind, like an announcement. The hall went silent in the particular way that halls go silent when something has happened that everyone saw, and no one is going to pretend they didn't. Marigold stood very still. From across the room, in the ringing quiet, a voice she didn't recognize said, with genuine wonder, "How is she still standing?" And then everyone laughed. Not the polite, suppressed kind. Not the kind you could pretend was about something else. The real kind. Walls ringing, eyes watering, 200 people kind. The kind that found every hollow in your chest and filled it with cold. From behind her, inside the basket, came a sound so low only she could hear it. A soft, steady rumble. Not a purr of contentment. Something firmer. The sound Pudding made when he pressed himself against her on bad nights, when the village had been cruel and she'd come home too tired to pretend otherwise. A sound that meant, "I see you. I'm here. You're not alone in this." Marigold did not cry. She had promised herself a long time ago that she would not cry in front of people who did not deserve her tears, and she kept her promises. She smiled instead, bright and absolutely fraudulent, gathered what remained of her dignity along with the back of her dress, scooped up the basket without breaking stride, turned on her heel, and walked, very quickly, very deliberately, toward the nearest door that was not the one she'd come in through. She had no idea where the door led. It opened into a servant's corridor, narrow and stone-cold, lined with unlit sconces and the kind of darkness that suggested it hadn't been used recently. She didn't care. She pushed through it and let it close behind her and leaned against the wall and breathed, properly, deeply, for the first time since morning, and let herself feel, for exactly 30 seconds, every single thing she'd been holding back since the cart. Pudding climbed out of the basket, stepped onto her boots, and sat there, all 4 pounds of warm, opinionated orange cat planted directly on her feet like an anchor. He said nothing. That was the thing about Pudding. He always seemed to know when silence was the right answer. She pressed her free hand against his head. He leaned into it. She breathed. 30 seconds. Then she pushed off the wall and started walking, because standing still and being miserable was one thing. But standing still and being miserable in a dark corridor in a castle she didn't know was several things. Most of them worse. Pudding padded alongside her, unhurried, tail raised, navigating the dark like he'd been born in it. She turned left, then right, then through an archway she was fairly sure she shouldn't have gone through, up a small flight of steps, and into a section of the castle that got progressively quieter and progressively more, she had no better word for it, intentional about its silence. The kind of silence that didn't happen by accident, the kind that was kept. She should go back. She knew she should go back. And then the mouse from the hall ran past her feet again. Marigold stopped. Pudding stopped too, and to his very great credit he did not lunge. He sat. He watched the mouse with enormous professional restraint and the expression of a cat making a very conscious decision. The mouse sat up, looked at Marigold with the bright, specific alertness of an animal that had something to communicate. This way, it said, not in words, in the warm directing pull that lived in her chest whenever animals tried to guide her. This way. Here. Come. You're the one who started all of this, Marigold told it. The mouse blinked. Yes, it agreed, entirely without guilt. Come anyway. Pudding looked at the mouse, looked at Marigold. I don't like it, he said, but I'll follow you. She followed the mouse. Down another corridor. Around a corner she nearly missed. Past a tapestry depicting 3 wolves beneath a crescent moon, their eyes stitched in actual silver thread that caught the torchlight and made them seem briefly, unsettlingly, alive. And then the mouse stopped in front of a wall. Just a wall. Stone, like every other stone in this castle. No door. No frame. No handle or hinge or any architectural feature whatsoever that would suggest it was anything other than a wall. The mouse looked at Marigold. Marigold looked at the wall. I am not walking into a wall, she said. Pudding sat down beside the mouse, folded his paws, and waited with the joint patience of 2 creatures who had already decided how this was going to end. Marigold pressed her hand against the stone. It was warm. Not the ambient warmth of sun-heated rock, something else. Something alive. The warmth moved beneath her palm like a slow pulse, and then, without creak or warning, or any of the dramatic groaning that Marigold felt the situation richly deserved, the stone simply opened, folding sideways like a door that had always been a door, and was only now remembering it. Beyond it, a staircase. Narrow, carved directly into the castle's bones, curving upward in a slow spiral. The stone steps glowed faintly, not with torchlight, but with something that lived inside the rock itself, the palest silver gold, like moonlight caught in amber. With every step she took, the glow brightened slightly beneath her feet, as though the staircase was waking up specifically for her. Pudding put one paw on the first step. The glow pulsed. He pulled his paw back and stared at it with an expression of profound personal offense. "It's warm," he said. "I know. I don't understand this place." "Neither do I. I still don't like the mouse." "Noted. Come on." She climbed. Pudding climbed behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him against her ankle. She didn't know why she kept going. She should have turned around. She was a herb woman's granddaughter from Thornwall with a ruined dress and a gift nobody wanted, and she was climbing a hidden staircase in a castle where she absolutely should not be. But the warmth pulled at her chest, the same way it did when the wolves in the forest led her to an injured animal, the same way her grandmother had always described the whisper gift, working when it wanted something from you. "Trust it," her grandmother had said. "It never leads you somewhere useless." The staircase ended at a single door. Heavy oak, banded in iron, unremarkable from a distance, except that carved into its center, so old the lines had softened, was the shape of a wolf mid-leap, and around it in a language she didn't speak, words that her bones somehow translated anyway. "Only the root-born may enter." Her hand was on the handle before her mind caught up. The room beyond was vast and dim and smelled of pine resin and something darker underneath, something storm-edged and ancient, and it took her 3 full seconds to understand what she was seeing: a bed the size of her entire cottage, maps pinned across one entire wall, weapons arranged with the care of things that were used, not displayed, a coat thrown over the back of a chair, enormous, black, lined in gray fur, not a guest room, not a study. Pudding walked in ahead of her, sniffed the coat on the chair with deep suspicion, then turned and looked at her with an expression she had learned to read over 3 years of cohabitation. "This belongs to someone very large," he said, and very certain of himself. From somewhere below, through the thick stone floor, she heard 2 guards talking. Their voices drifted upward in snatches, easy and unhurried, the voices of men who had no idea she was there. "Arrives back at midnight. Rode hard from the northern borders. Is Lady Callista informed? She's already waiting in the south wing. Had 3 maids pressed and her dress laid out since yesterday." A pause. A low laugh with something uncomfortable in it. "The king won't even look at anyone else. Hasn't for years. Woman's like ice, but she was built for that throne. And he knows it. Whoever ended up in his path otherwise. Wolf's pity on her. He doesn't do soft. He doesn't do patient. He doesn't do—" The other guard said something too low for her to catch. Both of them laughed. Marigold stood in the middle of the Alpha King's private chamber, holding the back of her ruined dress together with both hands, and looked at the coat on the chair, and the maps on the wall, and the staircase still glowing softly at her back. Pudding jumped onto the bed, turned 3 circles, and sat down with the finality of a cat who had made a territorial decision. The mouse sat on the top step and looked at her. "Told you," it said. "Somewhere useful." Downstairs, clearly, the front door opened. Marigold did what any reasonable person would do upon realizing they were standing, uninvited, in the private bedchamber of the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories, while holding the back of their dress together with their bare hands. She looked for somewhere to hide. The wardrobe was too far. The window was 3 stories up, and she had strong feelings about survivability. Under the bed was right there, and she was already moving toward it when Pudding, still arranged like a small sovereign in the center of the king's mattress, fixed her with a look of such withering judgment that she stopped mid-crouch. "Hiding under a bed," he said, "is not a dignified solution." "I am not currently prioritizing dignity," she whispered. Clearly. He licked one paw. "You haven't been prioritizing it since the dress." "Pudding, I need you to—" Boots on stone. The sound of someone climbing stairs. Not the hidden staircase, the main one, the normal one, the one that people who were supposed to be here used. Slow, even steps. The unhurried steps of someone who had never once in their life walked into a room and worried about what they'd find there. Marigold straightened up, smoothed the front of her dress, gripped the back of it, lifted her chin. This was fine. This was absolutely, categorically, in no possible interpretation of events, fine. The door opened. He was tall in the way that made the room suddenly feel like it had been measured wrong. That was the first thing she noticed. Not his face, not the long, pale gold hair that fell loose past his shoulders, not the breadth of him filling the doorframe like the doorframe had been specifically constructed around him as a complement. Just the sheer, immediate fact of him, the way the air in the room seemed to rearrange itself around his presence like water moving around a stone. Then he looked at her. His eyes were the deep gray of storm clouds collecting over a winter lake, the kind of gray that had depth to it, layers, the kind that wasn't just a color but a condition. They moved from her face to the back of her dress, which she was gripping in both fists, to Pudding, who was sitting on his pillow with the unassailable confidence of an animal who had decided the bed was his now, and back to her face. A long silence occupied the room. "There is a cat on my bed," he said. His voice was low and even, the voice of someone who had learned very early that volume was unnecessary when people were already paying attention. "Yes," Marigold said. "I'm sorry about that. He makes his own decisions." Another silence. "And you," he said carefully, as though constructing the sentence from first principles, "are in my room. Also, yes, I can explain that. Please." She opened her mouth. The explanation she had was, "A mouse led me here, the wall opened by itself, the staircase glowed, and I believe your castle may be making decisions without your knowledge," which was, she recognized, not an explanation that inspired confidence. She closed her mouth again, opened it. "A mouse? A mouse. Led me here, through a hidden staircase." She gestured at the wall where the door had been, which was, once again, entirely a wall. "It's closed now, which I understand does not help my case." The king looked at the wall, then at her. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not quite surprise, but the contained cousin of it. The look of someone filling in a blank they hadn't expected to reach so soon. "You found the root-borne passage," he said. "I didn't find it so much as a mouse showed it to me and my cat peer-pressured me into climbing it." Pudding made a sound of moderate agreement. For one suspended, disorienting moment, the corner of the king's mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the ghost of one. The architectural suggestion that a smile had once lived there and might, under unusual circumstances, return. Then it was gone, and his expression settled back into the composed, unreadable stillness that Marigold suspected he wore the way other men wore armor. He crossed the room, not toward her, toward the chair, where he set down the leather satchel he'd been carrying and shrugged off the riding gloves without looking at her. He moved the way large predators moved, with the economy of something that had never needed to announce itself. "What's your name?" he said. Not a question. Quite. More like a form being filled. "Marigold Thorn, from Thornwall Village." She paused. "I was at the presentation. I didn't mean to be here. I genuinely just needed a corridor that wasn't—" She stopped herself. "I had a bad afternoon." "I can see that," he said, his eyes briefly indicating the back of her dress. Heat flooded her face. "In my defense, that wasn't entirely my fault." "I didn't say it was." She blinked. That was not the response she'd expected. She'd expected dismissal. Cool, efficient, the guards will escort you out dismissal. Not that. She recalibrated, which took a moment. Pudding, apparently satisfied that the situation had stabilized, stepped off the pillow, walked to the end of the bed, and regarded the king with narrowed amber eyes. The king looked at the cat. The cat looked at the king. "He's tired," Pudding said, to Marigold only. "And something is worrying him. Has been for a while." A pause. "He smells like the North Road and old grief." Marigold said nothing, but something in her chest moved quietly. "You should go," the king said, not unkindly. He'd turned back to the satchel, was pulling out a folded map with the focused attention of someone slipping back into work like a coat. "Take the main staircase down and tell the first guard you see that you were lost. They'll bring you to the south wing." "Right." She gathered Pudding from the bed. He went with no argument, which meant he'd gotten what he came for. "I truly am sorry about all of this." "The passage opened for you," he said quietly, still looking at the map. "That hasn't happened in a very long time." He said it the way people said things they weren't quite ready to say out loud, releasing the words before fully intending to. Marigold stood in the doorway. "What does it mean?" He looked up then. Really looked at her. Not the dress, not the hair, not the inventory of everything she'd spent years watching people compile. Her. Something in that look was different from every other look she'd collected in 22 years, and she didn't have a name for the difference yet. "I don't know," he said. It was, she would think later, the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. She left. Behind her, the door clicked shut, and she stood in the corridor with an orange cat draped over her arms and a warmth behind her sternum that had nothing to do with the glowing staircase. From inside the room, clearly not meant for her to hear, the king said one low word to himself. She didn't catch it. Pudding did. He said nothing about it until they were halfway down the main stairs, and then, in the thoughtful tone he reserved for observations he considered significant, he said your name." Marigold missed a step. The south wing smelled of expensive perfume and quiet intimidation, which Marigold was beginning to understand was not a coincidence. She had found it easily enough. A guard had pointed her there with the blank efficiency of someone who had stopped asking questions about strange red-headed women emerging from unauthorized parts of the castle and had made his peace with it. The south wing was where the presentation candidates were being housed for the evening, fed and politely ignored until someone decided what to do with them. There was warm bread on a side table and a fire going and benches along the wall, and Marigold had just located the bench farthest from Lena Fairgate and was in the process of sitting down with great personal relief when the doors at the far end opened and Lady Callista Drath walked in. The room changed when she entered. Not dramatically, not the way storms changed things, all at once and announced. More the way winter changed things. Gradual. Inevitable. A drop in temperature so slow you didn't notice it until you were already cold. She was beautiful in the architectural sense of the word, the kind of beautiful that had been built rather than grown, assembled with precision and maintained with discipline. Dark hair coiled at the back of her neck without a strand out of place. A gown of deep blue that probably cost more than Thornwall's entire harvest. And eyes, pale, clear, the translucent gray-green of shallow water over stone that moved across the room with the unhurried efficiency of someone conducting an inventory. Those eyes landed on Marigold. They stayed there for exactly 3 seconds. Then they moved on, and Lady Callista crossed the room to speak to one of the assessors in a low, pleasant voice. And Marigold had the distinct and unshakable sensation of having just been categorized, labeled, and filed under not a concern. Pudding, draped across her lap, watched Callista with his tail moving in a slow metronome sweep. "She already knows," he said. Marigold's hand stilled on his back. "Knows what?" "About the passage. About you." His tail swept again. "She's pretending she doesn't. That's the interesting part." Before Marigold could process that, Callista was in front of her. "Marigold Thorn," she said. Not a question, She knew the name already, which was a thing. From Thornwall. "That's me," Marigold said, with the brightness of someone buying time. Callista looked at Pudding. Pudding looked at Callista. Neither of them blinked. "Charming," Callista said, in a tone that meant the opposite. She sat down on the bench across from Marigold with the perfect posture of someone who had been corrected for slouching often enough that her spine had simply given up trying. "I'll be direct with you. I find it saves time." "I appreciate directness," Marigold said. "The Rootborn passage opened for you today?" It wasn't a question. Her voice was light, conversational, the way very sharp things were sometimes described as elegant. "I know because the passage alert activates a mechanism in the assessor's records. It hasn't triggered in over 60 years. The fire popped. Marigold said nothing, which was the smartest thing she'd done all day. "Here is what you need to understand," Callista continued, folding her hands in her lap. "The Rootborn Pact is an ancient law, and ancient laws have a way of making people behave very foolishly. Whatever that passage suggested to you, whatever warmth you felt, whatever you imagined it meant." She paused, and for the first time something real moved behind her eyes, something that was almost, if you squinted, close to pain. "It cannot change what has already been arranged. I have spent 14 years preparing for a role that this kingdom needs someone prepared for, not someone who wandered in through a wall because a mouse thought it would be amusing." Silence. Pudding made a sound very low in his chest. Not a purr. Marigold looked at Callista. Really looked at her, the way she'd learned to look at animals when they were defensive. Past the surface. The posture, the composure, the 14 years of preparation worn like a second skin. She saw a woman who had sacrificed a very great deal for something she had been promised, and who was now watching that promise develop a crack. She almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I didn't ask for any of this," Marigold said quietly and without apology. "I was trying to find a corridor to fix my dress." "I know." Callista rose, smooth, unhurried. "I'm simply making sure you understand the landscape." She moved to go, then stopped, and when she turned back, her expression was pleasant again, impenetrable again, all the realness tucked away. "You have a cat in the south wing, by the way. That's not permitted." She left. Pudding watched her go. "I don't like her," he said. "I know." "She's not wrong, though, about what she wants." A pause. "That's what makes her dangerous." Marigold stared at the fire and turned that over in her mind for a long time. From across the room, she was fairly sure Lena Fairgate was watching her with the expression of someone who was going to have an excellent story to tell at the market on Thursday. The letter arrived before breakfast. Marigold knew it was official because it had a wax seal the size of her palm, a wolf mid-leap pressed into deep black wax, and was delivered by a guard who knocked on the south wing door with the gravity of a man personally appointed by fate. Every woman in the room watched him walk directly to Marigold with the narrow, fascinated attention of people witnessing something they hadn't predicted. She opened it. "Miss Thorne," it read, in handwriting that was precise and slightly impatient-looking, like the letters were trying to move faster than the pen. "Your presence is requested in the Eastern study at the first bell. Come alone. C.A. Come alone." Marigold looked at Pudding, asleep on the folded blanket she'd arranged for him on the window ledge. She left him a piece of bread from the breakfast table, which he accepted without opening his eyes. "C.A. has questions," he said, to the bread. "How do you know that?" He didn't sleep. Paced until the third hour. One amber eye opened. "The walls are thin and I have excellent hearing. Go." The Eastern study was smaller than his bedchamber, warmer and considerably more lived in. Books were stacked in the specific disorder of someone who read multiple things simultaneously and had strong opinions about where each one lived. Maps again, different ones, covered in notations. 2 chairs angled toward a fire that had been burning long enough to have settled into contentment. King Drystan was standing at the window when she entered. He'd changed from last night. Clean clothes, hair pulled back, though a few strands had escaped at his jaw in a way that seemed less intentional than the rest of him. He looked, she thought, like someone who had spent the night in conversation with a problem and hadn't yet reached a resolution. He turned when she came in. "Sit," he said, and then, half a beat later, with the slight recalibration of someone catching themselves, "Please." Marigold sat. "You don't have to add please if it's your castle." "I've been told I should add it regardless." He sat across from her, forearms on knees, and looked at her with the direct attention that she was starting to recognize as simply how he looked at things. Fully, without the social softening most people used. It was disconcerting. She was used to people's eyes sliding away from her. His didn't. "Tell me exactly what happened yesterday, from the beginning." So she told him. The mouse. The corridor. The wall, warm under her hand. The staircase glowing. She watched his face while she talked, and he gave very little away, but his jaw tightened slightly when she described the glow brightening beneath her feet, and something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, or something that recognized the thing recognition was made from. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The root-born pact," he said finally, "was written into the foundation of this castle by the first Alpha King and the Whisper Woman who stood at his side. It's older than the kingdom's current borders. It states that if a true whisperer, someone with a bloodline gift of animal speech, not trained, born, enters the sacred passage and the passage accepts them, they are bound to the alpha of this line as—" He stopped. Marigold waited. "As the only lawful Luna," he said. "It cannot be overridden by prior arrangement, by council vote, by anything." The fire crackled. Outside, a bird sang 3 notes and stopped. "So, what you're telling me," Marigold said slowly, "is that a mouse has effectively arranged my marriage." Something happened to his face. It lasted less than a second. A startled brightness quickly reined in, but she saw it, and her heart did the complicated thing it had done the night before. "That is one way to describe it. I'd like to hear the way that doesn't involve the mouse." "There isn't one." She pressed her hands flat on her knees and looked at the fire and took a full inventory of her situation, which was, she was a round, red-headed herb woman's granddaughter from Thornwall, with a gift nobody had ever called anything but strange, sitting across from a king who had a perfectly arranged betrothal and a court full of people who would sooner crown a fence post than someone like her, bound by a law older than the kingdom itself because a mouse had personal opinions about destiny. "Does Lady Callista know?" she asked. "She was informed this morning." His voice was carefully neutral. "She is managing the information." Managing the information was doing extraordinary work in that sentence. "And what do you want to do?" Marigold asked. He looked at her for a long moment, and again there was that quality to his gaze, the one that saw her and didn't look away, the one she had no category for yet. "I want to understand what I'm dealing with before I decide anything," he said. "Which is why you're here." He reached into the stack of books beside him and produced a slim, ancient-looking volume, its cover worn soft. "There are conditions in the pact, things a whisperer must demonstrate before the bond fully sets. We have 7 days." Marigold stared at the book. 7 days, she repeated. 7 days. "And if I just left? Went back to Thornwall?" He was quiet for a beat too long. "The passage chose you. If you leave before the 7 days complete, the pact considers it a rejection and—" Another pause. "The consequences fall on the whisperer, not the alpha." "Of course they do," she said, to no one in particular. From outside the door came a sound, soft, unmistakable. The precise sound of a cat sitting down directly against a door it had been told not to follow someone through. The king looked at the door, looked at Marigold. "You said you came alone." "I did." She cleared her throat. "He makes his own decisions." The first day of the 7 was, against all reasonable expectation, almost pleasant. The king, who had told her, with the air of someone making a small concession to the informal, that she could call him Drystan inside the study if she preferred, and who had then looked immediately uncertain about having said that, had assigned her a guest room in the East Corridor, a maid who was either very calm or very well trained, and a schedule that amounted to, "Be somewhere I can find you, and don't leave the castle grounds." Pudding had been given no official accommodations. He had resolved this by selecting a velvet chair in the eastern study and declaring it sovereign territory. Nobody removed him. Marigold suspected nobody tried. The days had a rhythm to them that she hadn't expected. Morning in the study, Drystan asking questions about the Whisperer gift, the way she'd inherited it, what it felt like from the inside. Not with the gawking curiosity people usually brought to the subject, the kind that made her feel like a market oddity, but with the focused attention of someone who genuinely wanted to understand a thing and was willing to sit with the complexity of it. She found herself saying things she'd never said out loud, how the animal voices weren't words exactly, but meaning. Warmth or cold, safety or warning, grief or want, direct as weather. How she'd learned as a child to translate it quickly so she didn't visibly react to things nobody else could hear. How exhausting it was, sometimes, to be the only person in any room who knew what the room's animals actually thought of the proceedings. "What does he think of the proceedings?" Drystan asked once, nodding at Pudding. Marigold looked at Pudding. Pudding was examining a bookshelf with one paw raised. "Right now he's deciding if that shelf is structurally sound enough to sit on," she said. "And?" "He's concluded it isn't, but he's going to try anyway." Pudding sat on the shelf. Several books slid. He adjusted without acknowledgement and settled in with his tail curled around his feet, radiating satisfaction. Something happened to Drystan's face again. That almost smile, the ghost of something warmer underneath the composure. It came more easily now, in the 3rd and 4th days, the way a door loosens in its frame the more it's used. Marigold was cataloging them without meaning to, the small ones when Pudding did something structurally inadvisable, the larger, more reluctant ones when she said something he hadn't predicted. The way his eyes moved differently when he looked at her than when he looked at anything else, and the way he didn't seem to realize it. "He's lonely," Pudding told her on the 4th evening from the chair, without preamble. "Has been for a long time. He hides it behind being certain about everything, the borders, the council, the arrangement. If he's always decided, he never has to feel how quiet this place is." Marigold looked at her hands. "He talked to his father's portrait last night," Pudding added. "In the hall. Thought no one heard." A pause. "I heard." She didn't ask what he'd said. Some things were not hers to know yet. Callista moved on the 5th day. She came to Marigold's room in the early evening, unhurried as ever, and sat in the window chair with her hands folded and her expression arranged into something that resembled concern the way a painted fire resembled warmth. "I'm going to tell you something," she said, "because I believe you deserve to know it." Marigold waited, which was the safest response to that particular kind of opening. "Drystan went to the High Council yesterday morning. Without you. Without telling you." Callista's voice was perfectly level. "He presented a formal inquiry into whether the root-born pact can be voided on grounds of, and I'm using his words, insufficient precedent for modern governance." She let that sit. "I thought you should know what he's doing behind the study door." The room was very quiet. "He's trying to void it," Marigold said. "He's trying to void it," Callista confirmed, and the thing in her eyes that was almost pain had a different quality now. Not cruelty, but something that had learned to use pain as a tool and no longer distinguished between the two. I'm not telling you this to wound you. I'm telling you because you have options, and you should exercise them before the 7 days complete, and the pact locks around you like a cage neither of you wanted. She left the same way she always left. Clean, unhurried, final. Marigold sat with it for an hour. The problem was that it was plausible. She'd always known it was plausible. She was a round, poor, animal-talking herb woman's granddaughter, and he was a king who had an elegant, prepared, 14 years in the making betrothed. And whatever was happening in those morning sessions in the study, the almost smiles, the way he looked at her, she had been wrong about people before. She was frequently, enthusiastically wrong about people. The next morning she overheard him in the corridor outside the study. She hadn't meant to. She'd been early, Pudding ahead of her, and the door was ajar, and Drystan's voice came through it low and firm and recognizable. Cannot allow the council to dictate the terms of a pact that supersedes their jurisdiction, which is why I brought the inquiry, to preempt their interference before they— The voice of an advisor cut in. And the woman herself, sire? She agrees to this? A pause. Marigold did not wait for the answer. She walked back down the corridor, collected her market basket, put Pudding inside it. He went without argument, which meant he understood, and walked toward the castle's main gate with her chin up and her chest carved hollow, and the absolute, resolute intention of sparing everyone, including herself, from the rest of this. She made it to the gate. The two great wolves were there, silver and still, the morning light sliding off their coats. They stepped together, shoulder to shoulder, blocking the exit. Whisperer, the nearer one said. Move, Marigold said very quietly. Please, cannot. Not unkind. Firm, the way the earth was firm. The pact is alive in you. If you cross before the 7th day, it does not release you. It turns. Turns into what? The wolf looked at her with its pale winter eyes. Something you would not recover from easily, it said, and he would feel it happen, instantly, across any distance. Marigold stared at the gate. Behind her, at a distance she couldn't measure, she heard boots on stone, moving fast. He was slightly out of breath when he reached her. That was the detail she fixed on. King Drystan Ashvile, who moved through every room like he'd already considered all possible outcomes, arriving at the castle gate with his hair half escaped from its tie and his expression doing something she had never seen it do before. Something open, urgent, stripped of all the careful architecture. He stopped a few feet away, looked at her, then at Pudding's head poking from the basket, then at the wolves who were still standing shoulder to shoulder with the patient certainty of creatures who had never once considered moving. She told you about the council inquiry, he said. It wasn't a question. You were trying to void it, Marigold said. I heard you. You heard half a sentence. His voice was quiet, not sharp. The difference mattered. I brought the inquiry to the council to block them from voiding it themselves. There are 3 council members who believe the pact is inconvenient for the kingdom's current arrangements and would have moved to nullify it without my consent by the end of the week. He held her gaze steadily. I was protecting it. I was protecting you. The hollow in her chest did something unexpected. It didn't fill all at once. It was more like warmth moving back in slowly, the way a room warmed after a long, cold night. You could have told me, she said. I should have told you. No qualification, no defense. I'm not accustomed to telling people things. It is a breath, something I'm aware I need to work on. Pudding's head emerged further from the basket. He looked at Drystan with his amber eyes. Tell her the rest, he said, to Drystan. Drystan blinked, looked at the cat, then, slowly, at Marigold. Does he actually? He actually, Marigold confirmed. A long moment passed, during which a king visibly recalibrated his understanding of the morning's audience. Then, with the expression of someone choosing to simply keep going. The pact gives you a choice. On the 7th day, it requires consent. Yours, freely given. If you say no, it releases you without consequence. He paused. I need you to know that it's your choice. And you? She asked. What do you choose? He looked at her. Not past her, not at the inventory of everything she was that the world considered a deficit. At her. The same way he'd been looking at her in the study for 5 days, the look she hadn't let herself name. I choose this, he said. Quietly. Certainly. The same voice he used when he talked about the borders and the council, but underneath it something warmer and less armored, something that sounded like it had not been said in a very long time. Not because of the pact. The pact is old magic and animal politics, and apparently your cat has opinions about it. Pudding made a sound of agreement. I choose it because you climbed a glowing staircase because a mouse asked you to, and you didn't cry when 200 people laughed at you, and you made me almost smile 4 times in 3 days, which I am reliably informed is a personal record. Marigold looked at him for a long moment. Callista, she said, has been offered a council position she is frankly better suited for than marriage to me. Something crossed his face, not unkindness, but honesty. She wanted the throne's power. The council position gives her that. She'll spend a week being furious about it, and then she'll be excellent at it. She knows it too. Pudding climbed out of the basket, walked to Dryston's boot, and sat on it. Acceptable, he said. Marigold laughed. The real kind, not the fraudulent one. And when Dryston smiled back at her, fully this time, no ghost of it, no architecture holding it in check, she understood that this was what the staircase had known before either of them did. 3 years later, the castle east wing smelled permanently of dried herbs and cat, which the staff had stopped commenting on. Marigold. Luna. Marigold, a title she had spent the first 6 months tripping over and the following 2.5 years growing into like a garden, growing into a wall, finding all the cracks and filling them with green, was standing in the great hall when the girl was brought in. She was 16, frightened, and had apparently been found in the castle's lower corridor, following a sparrow. Marigold knew the look on her face. She had worn it herself. The brace for laughter that had become so automatic it had forgotten how to release. She crossed the hall, sent the guard away with a look, and crouched to be at the girl's height. "The sparrow brought you?" she asked. The girl stared. "You don't think that's strange?" "I think it's the most ordinary thing about you," Marigold said. "Come on. There's bread in the study, and a cat who will judge you immediately, and a king who adds please to sentences now when he remembers, which is about 60% of the time." She stood and offered her hand. "I'll explain the rest while you eat." Pudding appeared from around the corner, looked at the girl, looked at Marigold. "Another one," he said, with profound, affectionate resignation. "Another one," she agreed. From the end of the hall, Dryston watched the two of them, his wife and his cat, collecting strays, filling the castle with warmth it had not known how to hold before she arrived. And something in his chest that had been quiet for a very long time was simply, completely, not quiet anymore. If this story found you somewhere you needed it, the humiliation that made you want to disappear, the staircase that opened anyway, the king who learned to say please, leave a comment telling me which moment made you feel it most. And if you want more stories about the ones everyone overlooked, who turned out to be exactly who the old magic was waiting for, let me know. I'll be here.